The moment the world first glimpsed their faces did not occur on a battlefield, but in the snow-brushed stillness of a prisoner camp in Massachusetts, where 70 Japanese women stood trembling in February cold waiting to discover if the propaganda had been true. 70 faces, identical dark eyes behind identical wire-rimmed glasses, identical navy uniforms beneath identical wool coats, identical hairstyles pulled so tight against their skulls that from 30 feet away, the American guards could not tell where one woman ended and another began. Private James O'Connor shifted his weight from one boot to the other, his breath forming small clouds in the winter air. 22 years old, Irish Catholic from Dorchester, 3 weeks removed from the telegram that had split his world in half. His older brother Sean, 24, killed at Iwo Jima on February 23rd. The date burned into Jimmy's mind like a brand. Today was March 2nd. 7 days these women had been here. 7 days he had been trying to see them as people instead of the enemy that took his brother. It wasn't working, but orders were orders. The camp needed individual identification photos for Geneva Convention compliance, medical records, dietary restrictions, repatriation documentation. Impossible to process 70 identical silhouettes. Jimmy cleared his throat. Beside him, Thomas Nakamura, the interpreter, stood with the patient stillness of a man who had translated 1,000 difficult conversations. 45 years old, second generation Japanese-American. Nisei, they called it. Born in Fresno, raised in San Francisco, now serving his country by bridging the gap between worlds that wanted nothing more than to destroy each other. Thomas nodded to Jimmy. "Go ahead." Jimmy spoke, his voice rougher than he intended. "Could you let your hair down, just so we can see your faces better?" The words hung in the frozen air. Thomas translated his Japanese fluid and gentle, trying to soften what could not be softened. For 30 seconds, nothing moved. Not the women, not the guards, not even the snow, which seemed to pause mid-fall, waiting to see what would happen next. Then the sound began. Quiet at first, a sob from somewhere in the middle of the formation. Then another, a sharp intake of breath. A whispered word in Japanese that Thomas did not bother to translate because its meaning was written on every face. Shame. In the culture these women came from, hair was not merely decoration. It was identity, dignity. The way a woman wore her hair announced her status, her respectfulness, her self-control. To arrange it carefully was to honor yourself and those around you. To let it fall loose in public before strange men was a kind of nakedness that had nothing to do with the body. Jimmy felt his stomach twist. He had not known. How could he have known? From the back of the formation, one woman stepped forward. She was not tall, perhaps 5'3", slight build beneath the heavy coat, but she moved with a deliberate precision that made the other women part to let her through. Her face, when she emerged from the group, was neither defiant nor afraid. It was watchful, analytical, the face of someone who had survived by understanding her surroundings before acting. Her name, Jimmy would learn later, was Haruko Tanaka, 28 years old, trained as a civilian nurse in Nagasaki before the war swallowed everything, conscripted into military service when the empire needed bodies more than it needed morality, field nurse on Saipan during the collapse, evacuated on the last transport ship before the Americans took the island, captured in Manila when her hospital ship struck a mine and went down in shallow water. 3 months as a prisoner, 3 months of waiting to die, but she had not died. And now she stood before this young American guard with the red-rimmed eyes, and she made a choice. Haruko reached up to the bun at the base of her skull. Her fingers, steady despite the cold, found the first pin. A small piece of bent metal. Nothing special. She removed it slowly, letting it rest in her palm for a moment before sliding it into her coat pocket. 11 more pins followed, each one withdrawn with the same careful deliberation, each one making a small clicking sound as it touched the others in her pocket. The sound was surprisingly loud in the silence. Click, click, click. Jimmy watched, unable to look away. Around him, the other guards stood frozen, as if witnessing something sacred that they had stumbled into by accident. When the 12th pin came free, Haruko's hair began to fall, slowly at first, a few strands loosening from the bun's structure, then more. Then all of it unwinding, like a spool of black silk tumbling past her shoulders, past her shoulder blades, settling against the small of her back. The wind caught it immediately, lifting strands across her face. She did not brush them away. For 5 seconds, maybe 10, she stood there, hair loose, face exposed, letting this stranger, this enemy, see her. Jimmy felt something crack inside his chest. Not his heart, something harder, something that had been holding him together since the telegram arrived. He nodded. Once. A small dip of his chin, not approval, not gratitude, just acknowledgement. Thank you. Haruko did not respond. She simply turned and walked back to her place in formation, her hair still loose, still moving in the wind. The other women stared at her, some with horror, some with something that might have been admiration. At the front of the group, another woman stood rigid as iron, Captain Reiko Fujimoto, 45 years old, career military. The kind of officer who believed that discipline was the only thing separating humans from animals, and that in war, even humanity was negotiable. Fujimoto's eyes, when they settled on Haruko, carried no warmth, but they carried something else, something that looked almost like pain. That night in the barracks that housed all 70 women, silence filled the spaces between the bunks like a living thing. Haruko sat on the edge of her narrow cot, her hair still loose around her shoulders. She had not pinned it back up. Some part of her, the part that was tired of being a soldier, wanted to see what would happen if she simply stopped performing the role. Beside her bunk, a younger woman perched on her own cot. Yuki Sato, 24 years old, former clerk at a supply depot in Okinawa. Soft-voiced and quick to smile before the war taught her that smiling made you a target. Yuki whispered in Japanese, "You were brave, or foolish. I cannot decide which." Haruko stared at the opposite wall where frost had begun to form in the corners of the window. Neither. I was curious. Curious, his eyes. Haruko's voice was barely audible. The young guard, he looked like he had lost someone. Yuki was quiet for a moment. We have all lost someone. Yes. Haruko nodded slowly, but he looked like he had lost someone recently, like the grief was still bleeding. I know that look. I wore it in Saipan. Footsteps approached, heavy, deliberate. Both women fell silent. Captain Fujimoto stopped beside Haruko's bunk. The older woman's face was unreadable in the dim light filtering from the single bulb that hung from the ceiling. For 30 seconds, Fujimoto said nothing. Just stood there looking down at Haruko with an expression that might have been anger or might have been something more complicated. Then she spoke. In Saipan, I would have reported you for treason. Haruko met her eyes. We are not in Saipan anymore, Captain. No. Fujimoto's voice was quiet. We are not. The captain turned and walked away, her footsteps fading toward the far end of the barracks where the senior prisoners kept their bunks. But as she walked, Haruko noticed something. The set of Fujimoto's shoulders had changed. Not much, just a slight slump, as if some invisible weight had been added. Haruko lay back on her cot, staring at the ceiling. From her coat pocket, she withdrew a small object wrapped in cloth. She unwrapped it carefully, even though no one could see her in the darkness. A kanzashi, a hair ornament, pearl and silver shaped like a cherry blossom. Given to her by Dr. Takeshi Yamamoto on a spring afternoon in Nagasaki that felt like it belonged to a different lifetime. He had smiled when he placed it in her hands. Wear it on our wedding day. 1 week later, the military conscripted him. 1 month after that, his letters stopped coming. Last she heard, he was assigned to a field hospital on Okinawa. That was 8 months ago. Haruko ran her thumb over the pearl petals. In the darkness, she whispered words that no one else would hear. Takeshi, if you are still alive, if you can somehow hear me. I wore my hair down today. I do not know who I am anymore. She wrapped the kanzashi carefully and tucked it back into her pocket against her heart. Sleep, when it came, was thin and restless. Morning arrived with the sound of boots on frozen ground and the sharp brightness of winter sun on snow. 70 women shuffled toward the mess hall, their breath forming clouds, their movements stiff from cold and uncertainty. They had been told that breakfast would be provided. They had not been told what that meant. The smell reached them before they entered the building. It was a scent unlike anything in Japanese military rations. Rich, heavy, fat, rendering in heat, salt and smoke, and something almost sweet underneath. A scent that belonged to abundance, to a country that had never known real hunger, to a people who thought bacon for breakfast was normal instead of an impossible luxury. Haruko stopped at the entrance to the mess hall, her nose filling with that scent, her stomach responding with the pangs so sharp it hurt. Inside, American soldiers moved between long tables, setting down plates. On each plate, scrambled eggs, golden and steaming. 2 slices of toast, still warm butter, melting into the bread. A small glass of orange juice. And 3 strips of bacon crispy at the edges, glistening with fat. 70 women stood frozen just inside the door. This was not prisoner food. This was not even soldier food. This was the kind of breakfast that belonged in propaganda films about American excess. The kind of meal that Japanese civilians had not seen since before the war. The kind of abundance that made the rations they had survived on look like starvation by comparison. A few women began to cry, quietly, without sound, just tears sliding down their faces as they stared at the plates. Captain Fujimoto's voice cut through the silence, sharp and cold. Do not touch it. This is a trick. They are trying to manipulate us. But Haruko was already moving toward a table, not because she trusted the Americans, because she understood chemistry. If they wanted us dead, she said quietly, they would have poisoned the air we have been breathing for 7 days, not the food. She sat down, picked up a fork. The metal felt strange in her hand after months of eating with chopsticks or her fingers or not eating at all. The other women watched. Haruko lifted a single strip of bacon to her mouth. The first bite was a revelation. Salt exploded across her tongue. Then fat-rich and coating rendering down into something that tasted like it had been designed to bypass thought and go straight to the brain's pleasure center. The meat itself was tender beneath the crispy exterior. Each chew releasing more flavor, more salt, more of that smoky sweetness that made her close her eyes without meaning to. She had not tasted anything like this since before Saipan, since before the war, since before the world had taught her that pleasure was something to be ashamed of. A sound escaped her throat. Not quite a moan, just a small exhalation of something that might have been relief or might have been grief for all the meals she had missed and all the mornings she had woken to nothing, all the times her stomach had cramped with hunger, while officers told her that suffering built character. Yuki, watching from 2 tables away, picked up her own fork. Then Michiko Ito, 19 years old translator, barely more than a girl. Then Sachiko Nakamura, 32, another nurse who had worked alongside Haruko in Saipan. Then 15 more. Then 30. Then 50. The sound of women eating filled the mess hall. Forks on plates, small noises of surprise. A few quiet sobs as the taste of real food overwhelmed defenses that had been built from months of deprivation. Captain Fujimoto remained standing near the door, arms crossed, face hard. But Haruko, glancing up between bites, saw something that made her pause. Fujimoto's hands were shaking, just slightly, a small tremor in the fingers. The hands of someone who wanted desperately to eat, but could not allow herself to want anything. Haruko stood, picked up an extra plate that a guard had left on the serving counter, and walked it over to Fujimoto. She set it down on the nearest table without saying a word. Fujimoto stared at the plate, at the eggs and toast and bacon, at the small glass of orange juice that caught the morning light. I am not hungry, Fujimoto said. Haruko met her eyes. Yes, Captain, you are. She walked back to her seat, leaving the plate behind. For 10 minutes, Fujimoto did not move. Then, when most of the other women had finished eating and were starting to file out of the mess hall, the captain sat down, picked up the fork, cut a small piece of egg. Haruko watched from across the room as Fujimoto ate, slowly, methodically, as if each bite was an act of surrender. When the captain reached for the bacon, her hand shook so badly that she had to set the fork down and take a breath before trying again. The day unfolded in a rhythm that felt almost normal. Roll call, assignments to light work details, a brief medical inspection where an American doctor, speaking through Thomas, checked each woman for signs of illness or injury and treated them with a gentleness that felt more disturbing than cruelty would have been. Haruko spent the afternoon in the camp laundry, scrubbing uniforms in hot water that made her hands red but felt like a luxury after months of cold water and harsh soap. Yuki worked beside her, neither woman speaking much, both lost in their own thoughts. As the sun began to set, painting the snow orange and pink, Haruko found herself walking the perimeter of the camp. Not trying to escape, just needing to move, to think. She found Private O'Connor standing near the fence, staring out at the forest beyond. He did not notice her approach until she was only a few feet away. He turned startled, his hand moving instinctively toward the rifle slung over his shoulder before he recognized her and relaxed. They stood in silence for a moment, two people separated by language and war and the deaths of people they had loved. Then Thomas appeared as if summoned by the awkwardness. The interpreter nodded to both of them. Evening, Jimmy looked at Haruko, then at Thomas. Could you tell her something for me? Thomas waited. Jimmy took a breath. Tell her thank you. For this morning, for helping us with the identification. I know it was hard. Thomas translated. Haruko listened, her face unreadable. When Thomas finished, she spoke quietly in Japanese. Thomas turned to Jimmy. She says to tell your family she is sorry for your loss. Jimmy's face went very still. How did she know? Thomas asked Haruko. She responded, gesturing slightly to Jimmy's eyes. Thomas translated. She says she can see it, in the way you stand, in the way you look at us, like you are trying to decide if we are human or if we are the reason he is gone. Jimmy's jaw worked. He looked away, blinking hard. Haruko spoke again. She says Thomas continued that her fiancé is probably dead too. He was a doctor, assigned to Okinawa. She has not heard from him in 8 months. So she understands. The not knowing. The hoping even when hope is foolish. Jimmy wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. His brother Sean was 24. Died February 23rd at Iwo Jima. He was a good man. Best person I knew. Thomas translated. Haruko nodded slowly. Then she reached into her pocket and withdrew something small. The kanzashi. She held it up so Jimmy could see the pearl cherry blossom catching the last light of the sun. She spoke. Thomas translated. She says her fiancé gave this to her, told her to wear it on their wedding day. She has been carrying it for 3 years. She does not know if she will ever wear it, but she carries it anyway, because forgetting him feels like killing him twice. Jimmy stared at the ornament, at this small, beautiful thing that had survived bombs and evacuations and months at sea and imprisonment, at this piece of hope that made no logical sense. He nodded. Yeah, I get that. He reached into his own pocket and pulled out a rosary, wooden beads worn smooth, a small silver cross. My brother gave me this, 2 days before he shipped out. Told me to pray for him. I do, every night, even though I know he is already gone, even though I know prayers do not change anything. Thomas did not need to translate. The meaning was clear enough. For a moment, the three of them stood together as the sun finished setting and the cold began to deepen. 3 people holding small pieces of the dead. 3 people trying to figure out how to keep living. Haruko spoke once more, then turned and walked back toward the barracks. Jimmy looked at Thomas. What did she say? Thomas watched her go, his expression soft. She said thank you for seeing her. Not as the enemy, not as a prisoner, just as a person who has lost too much. She said it is the first time since Saipan that anyone has looked at her like that. Jimmy was quiet for a long time. Then he said, voice rough, I did not know we were supposed to be monsters. Thomas smiled sadly. Neither did they. That night, Haruko lay in her bunk and thought about the bacon, about the way it had tasted like pleasure and guilt in equal measure, about Captain Fujimoto's shaking hands, about the young guard with the dead brother and the rosary he could not stop carrying. She thought about propaganda, the kind that told Japanese soldiers that Americans were demons who would torture and rape and kill without mercy, the kind that showed images of atrocities and called it truth. But today she had eaten bacon cooked by demons, had been offered orange juice by monsters, had been seen, truly seen by an enemy who should have hated her. On a scrap of paper she found in the pocket of her uniform, using a pencil stub that Yuki had stolen from the administrative office, Haruko began to write. The words came slowly at first, then faster. She wrote to Takeshi even though he was probably dead, even though the words would never reach him, because speaking to the dead was the only way she knew how to speak to herself. Takeshi, I ate bacon today, real American bacon, crispy and rich and so full of fat that I felt ashamed for enjoying it. We were told they would starve us. Instead, they feed us better than our own officers ever did. I do not understand this country. I do not understand these people. A boy who lost his brother showed me kindness. A camp that holds us prisoner treats us like guests. Everything I was taught is wrong, or everything I am seeing is a lie. I do not know which is more frightening. If you are alive, if you can somehow hear me, tell me what to do. Tell me how to survive kindness when I was prepared for cruelty. Tell me how to stay myself when everything I thought I knew is crumbling. I miss you. I miss the version of me who knew you. I do not know who I am becoming. She folded the paper and tucked it under her mattress where no one would find it. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and silent, covering the camp in white, covering the ugliness of wire and guard towers, and the persistent reminder that they were prisoners in a country that had every reason to hate them. But inside the barracks, 70 women slept with full stomachs for the first time in months. And in the darkness, Haruko touched the kanzashi one more time, then let it go. Tomorrow would bring new questions, new contradictions, new moments of small mercy that felt more dangerous than any cruelty. But tonight she had eaten bacon, had been seen, had written words to a dead man who might not be dead. Tonight that was enough. 8 days into captivity, a wooden crate arrived on the back of a supply truck. Private O'Connor and another guard lifted it down the wood, creaking under weight that seemed too substantial for its size. They carried it to the barracks entrance and set it down with a hollow thud that brought 70 women to the windows. Jimmy straightened, wiping his hands on his uniform. He caught Thomas's eye and nodded. The interpreter stepped forward, positioning himself where all the women gathered near the door could see him. "For you, ladies," Jimmy said. His voice carried that particular tone of someone who expected resistance. No strings attached. Thomas translated his Japanese careful and clear. The women stared. None moved. Captain Fujimoto appeared at the front of the group, her posture rigid. She spoke sharply in Japanese, and Thomas's face tightened slightly before he turned back to Jimmy. "The captain says they should not touch it. She believes it is manipulation." Jimmy looked at the crate, then at Fujimoto, then at the dozens of faces watching him with expressions ranging from suspicion to desperate hope. He thought about the bacon breakfast 6 days ago, about how some of these women had cried while eating, about how his mother had packed care packages for soldiers she would never meet because she believed in taking care of people, even strangers, even in wartime. He shrugged. "Suit yourselves, but it is not going anywhere." The guards walked away, leaving the crate sitting in the thin March sunlight like a test. For 20 minutes, no one approached it. Then Michiko Ito, the youngest of them at 19, edged closer. Her translator training had taught her curiosity before caution, a trait that had nearly gotten her killed twice during evacuations. Now it drew her forward, while the older women watched with varying degrees of disapproval. Michiko knelt beside the crate. The lid was nailed shut, but loosely, as if whoever packed it had wanted to make opening it easy rather than difficult. She worked her fingers under the edge. The wood protested, then gave. The nails pulled free with a sound like small bones breaking. The scent hit first. Lavender, clean and floral, and so unexpected that Michiko made a small noise in her throat. Behind her, other women pressed closer, drawn by that smell the way starving animals are drawn to food. Michiko lifted the lid completely. Inside, nested in wood shavings, lay items arranged with care. Bars of soap wrapped in paper printed with flowers. Wooden combs with teeth so smooth they caught the light. Small scissors with sharp blades and handles shaped for women's hands. Mirrors no bigger than playing cards. Bobby pins in neat rows. And at the bottom, a jar of cold cream with a label that showed a woman's face serene and beautiful. Tucked among the items was a card, handwritten in careful script. Michiko pulled it out, her hands shaking slightly. She read aloud in halting English, then Japanese. "For your comfort, you are guests, not animals." Signed, Camp Commander Colonel Robert Hayes. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was the silence of women trying to reconcile what they had been taught with what they were seeing. The silence of cognitive dissonance made physical. Yuki stepped forward, reaching past Michiko to pick up one of the soap bars. She unwrapped it slowly, the paper crinkling, brought it to her nose. Her eyes closed. "It smells like my mother's garden," she whispered. "Before the fire bombings. Before everything burned." One by one, the younger women approached, touching the combs, examining the mirrors, running fingers over the smooth handles of the scissors, each touch tentative, as if the objects might bite or vanish, or reveal themselves as elaborate cruelty. But they did not vanish. They remained solid and real and inexplicably kind. Captain Fujimoto watched from 15 feet away, her arms crossed over her chest. Do not be fooled. They are trying to soften you, make you forget what they are. Haruko, standing beside a window where she had been watching the guards walk away, turned to look at the captain. What are they, Captain? What have they actually done to us? Fujimoto's eyes narrowed. They have imprisoned us. After they pulled us from the ocean and gave us dry clothes and medical care. Haruko's voice was quiet but steady. After they fed us bacon and eggs instead of letting us starve. After they gave us heated barracks instead of leaving us in the cold. This is not what we were told imprisonment would be. You are naive. Perhaps Haruko moved toward the crate, aware that every eye was on her. Or perhaps I am simply paying attention. She knelt beside Machiko and selected a wooden comb. The craftsmanship was simple but solid. American-made, probably from a general store somewhere in Massachusetts. Mass-produced but functional. Democratic in its ordinariness. Haruko stood and walked back to her bunk. She sat down, removed the pins from her hair, and began to comb. The sound filled the barracks. A soft, rhythmic whisper as the teeth moved through tangles that had accumulated over months of neglect. She worked slowly, patiently, starting at the ends and moving upward. Each stroke hurt in a way that felt almost good. Like pressing on a bruise to remember you were still capable of feeling. The lavender scent rose with each pull of the comb, mixing with the smell of wood smoke from the barrack stove, creating something that felt almost like peace. Yuki joined her, bringing her own soap and a small mirror. She sat on her bunk and began washing her hands, working the lather up her wrists between her fingers under her nails. The grime of months slowly giving way to clean skin underneath. When was the last time we were clean? Yuki said softly. Really clean. Not just functional, but clean in a way that made us feel human. Haruko did not answer. She was crying, tears sliding down her face as she continued combing her hair. Not sobbing, just silent crying while her hands kept working. Crying because kindness was somehow harder to bear than cruelty. Crying because the comb in her hand was such a small thing, and small things were not supposed to undo you. By evening, 47 women had used items from the crate. Captain Fujimoto had not moved from her post near the door. But Haruko, lying awake long after lights out, heard footsteps in the darkness. Heard the soft sound of wood scraping wood as someone lifted the crate's lid. Heard the unmistakable whisper of a comb moving through hair. She did not look. Some surrenders needed to happen in private. The next morning brought new tension. During roll call, one of the guards noticed that Sachiko Nakamura had been sketching on a scrap of paper. The drawing was crude but recognizable. A layout of the barracks, guard positions, the fence line. The guard brought it to his sergeant. The sergeant brought it to Colonel Hayes. Within an hour, Sachiko was standing in the camp commander's office, while Thomas translated, and Captain Fujimoto watched with an expression that managed to convey both concern and vindication. Colonel Hayes was 52 years old, career military with gray hair and a face that looked like it had seen too many things to be surprised by much. He studied the sketch, then looked at Sachiko. Ma'am, were you gathering intelligence? Thomas translated. Sachiko's face had gone pale. No, sir, I was just drawing. To pass the time. I used to sketch before the war. It helps me think. Hayes looked at the paper again. This is a fairly detailed layout of our facility. I was not counting guards or measuring distances. I was just drawing what I could see from the window. I am sorry, I did not think it would be a problem. The colonel was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed and set the paper down. Miss Nakamura, I believe you. But you need to understand that some of my men have lost friends and brothers to Japanese forces. They are trying to be professional, trying to follow orders and treat you with respect. But something like this makes that harder. Do you understand? Sachiko nodded, tears starting to form. I understand. I am sorry. Hayes looked at Fujimoto. Captain, can you ensure that any drawing activities are clearly recreational? Maybe have them sketch flowers or portraits instead of camp layouts. Fujimoto's response was stiff. There will be no more drawing. Hayes frowned. That is not what I said. With respect, Colonel, I know my women. Give them freedom and they will abuse it. Hayes leaned back in his chair. Captain Fujimoto, they are your women, but they are my responsibility. And I will not punish someone for drawing pictures to keep from going insane in a prison camp. but I would appreciate your help in making sure misunderstandings like this do not happen again. After they left the office, Fujimoto turned on Sachiko in the hallway. You humiliated us. Sachiko flinched. I did not mean to. Your intentions do not matter. Your actions matter. And your actions gave them reason to doubt us. Haruko, who had been waiting in the hallway with Yuki, stepped forward. Captain, she made a mistake. An innocent mistake. The colonel understood that. Fujimoto's gaze swung to Haruko. You defend her because you have both gone soft. This is exactly what they want. They give you soap and food and comfort, and you forget that we are at war. Are we, Haruko's voice was quiet but firm. We are not fighting. We are surviving. There is a difference. You think survival is enough? I think survival is everything. Because if we do not survive, then everyone we lost died for nothing. The two women stared at each other, the tension between them almost visible. Then Fujimoto did something unexpected. She slapped Haruko across the face. The sound echoed in the hallway. Sharp and shocking and final. Haruko's head snapped to the side. She stood there for a moment, hand rising slowly to touch her cheek. When she looked back at Fujimoto, her expression was not angry. It was sad. That does not make you right, Captain. It just makes you violent. Fujimoto's hand was shaking. She stared at it as if it belonged to someone else. Then she turned and walked away, her footsteps sharp and quick. Sachiko was crying. I'm sorry. I am so sorry. Haruko touched her shoulder. It is not your fault. She is afraid. We are all afraid. Fear makes people cruel. But someone had been watching. Someone who understood that exactly what had just happened and what it meant. That afternoon, Thomas Nakamura requested a meeting with Captain Fujimoto, Haruko, and Sachiko. They gathered in a small office near the administrative building. Thomas sat behind a desk that was not his, but he carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades navigating between worlds. Captain Thomas began speaking in Japanese. I want to tell you something about myself, something I do not usually share. Fujimoto's expression was guarded. Why? Because I think it might help you understand why we do this work, and why I believe that what is happening here matters. He took a breath. I was born in Fresno, California. My parents came from Hiroshima in 1898. They worked hard, built a farm, raised 3 children. My wife Keiko, her family came from the same prefecture. We married in 1939, had a daughter in 1940. Life was good. He paused, his hands folding together on the desk. Then Pearl Harbor happened. My family was sent to Manzanar internment camp. I was allowed to stay out because the military needed translators. So I translate, I build bridges, because I do not want hatred to be the only language left in the world. Fujimoto's expression had not changed, but something in her eyes suggested she was listening more carefully now. Thomas continued. My wife's family remained in Hiroshima, her parents, 2 brothers, a sister. We wrote letters until the mail stopped getting through last year. I do not know if they are alive or dead, but I know this. If they are alive, if they were captured by American forces, I would want those forces to treat them with decency. Not because my family deserves it more than anyone else, but because decency is what separates us from the thing we are fighting against. He looked at Fujimoto directly. Captain, you have a daughter. Her name is Grace. She is 20 years old. She is in Manzanar. Fujimoto went very still. How do you know that? Because I have seen the records. Because I asked. Because I wanted to understand why you are so hard on these women. And now I think I do. You are hard on them because you are hard on yourself. Because you chose the empire over your daughter and you cannot forgive yourself for it. Fujimoto's voice was barely a whisper. You have no right to speak of her. I have every right. Thomas's voice was gentle but firm. Because she is in the same kind of camp that you are in now. And I promise you, Captain, the guards at Manzanar are not slapping women for defending each other. They are not punishing women for drawing pictures. They are doing their time, following orders, trying to maintain some measure of humanity in an inhumane situation. He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket and slid it across the desk. I can help you write to her. The Red Cross has channels. It takes time, but letters get through. If you want to reach out to your daughter, I can help you do that. Fujimoto stared at the envelope as if it might explode. I cannot. Yes, you can. She does not want to hear from me. You do not know that. I know that I chose duty over her. I know that I told her the empire mattered more than family. I know that the last thing I said to her was that she was weak for choosing to stay in America instead of returning to Japan with me. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, and now you are in America, in a camp, just like she is. Maybe that gives you something to write about. Maybe that is the bridge you need. Fujimoto's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the desk, trying to still them. I do not know how to ask for forgiveness. Start by telling the truth. Tell her you were wrong. Tell her you love her. Tell her you are sorry. The words do not have to be perfect. They just have to be honest. Haruko, who had been silent through all of this, spoke quietly. Captain, I saw the photograph, the one you dropped during the interrogation. Your daughter has kind eyes, like yours. She is waiting to forgive you. You just have to give her the chance. Fujimoto looked at Haruko, and for the first time since Saipan, the Iron Captain's face crumpled. Not dramatically, just a subtle collapse as if the structure holding her together had suddenly failed. I do not deserve forgiveness. None of us do. Haruko's voice was soft. But we need it anyway. That is what makes us human. That night, Haruko lay in her bunk and thought about Captain Fujimoto's shaking hands, about the way the older woman's face had looked when Thomas mentioned her daughter, about the weight of choosing between duty and love, and how that weight never really lifted, just shifted from one shoulder to the other. She pulled out her small collection of paper scraps. She had been writing on anything she could find: ration labels, margins of old newspapers, the backs of administrative forms that Yuki stole from the office. She wrote another letter to Takeshi. They gave us soap that smells like lavender, like Mother's garden before you and I met, before the war, before everything became about survival instead of living. I cried when I combed my hair today. Not because it hurt, because it felt good, because feeling good felt like betrayal, like I was choosing comfort over loyalty to everyone who is suffering. But Takeshi, I am so tired of suffering. I am tired of wearing pain like armor. I am tired of pretending that hardness is the same as strength. The Americans are teaching me something I do not want to learn. That kindness is not weakness. That mercy is not surrender. That maybe the war already took enough from us, and we do not have to let it take our humanity too. If you are alive, you would tell me I am being foolish. You would remind me that they are the enemy. But Takeshi, I have been watching the enemy for 8 days, and mostly they just look tired. Like us. Like people who want the war to be over so they can go home to people they love. I miss you. But I am starting to think that missing you does not mean I have to stop living. She folded the paper and added it to the small stack under her mattress. A collection of letters to a man who was probably dead. A collection of thoughts she could not speak aloud without sounding like she had betrayed everything she was supposed to believe. 2 bunks away, she heard movement. Quiet. Secretive. The sound of someone trying not to be heard. Haruko turned her head slightly. In the darkness, she could just make out Captain Fujimoto's silhouette. The older woman was sitting on the edge of her bunk, holding something small in her hands. A comb. Fujimoto was combing her hair. Slowly. Carefully. Each stroke deliberate and measured. And even in the darkness, Haruko could see the way the captain's shoulders shook. Some surrenders happened in private. Some happened so quietly that you could almost pretend they had not happened at all. But they still counted. The next morning, Captain Fujimoto approached Thomas before breakfast. She spoke quietly, her words too low for anyone else to hear. Thomas nodded, pulled out a piece of paper and a pen, sat down with her at one of the empty mess hall tables. For 2 hours they worked together, Thomas asking gentle questions, Fujimoto answering in halting sentences. Thomas writing, then reading back what he had written, then revising based on Fujimoto's corrections. When they finished, Fujimoto held the letter in her hands and stared at it as if it were a live grenade. You do not have to send it, Thomas said, but I think you should. If she does not respond, I do not know if I can bear it. And if she does respond, if she forgives you, can you bear that? Fujimoto was quiet for a long time. Then she nodded once, sharp and decisive. Send it. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived via Red Cross channels. Thomas brought it to Fujimoto in the barracks. The other women watched as the captain took the envelope with trembling hands, watched as she opened it with a precision that spoke of barely controlled emotion, watched as she read, and watched as she began to cry. Not quietly, not privately, but openly, her face crumpling, her body folding forward as decades of rigidity finally broke under the weight of 3 handwritten pages. Haruko moved to her side, placing a hand on the captain's shoulder. "What does it say?" Fujimoto could not speak. She just handed the letter to Haruko. Haruko read aloud, translating from English to Japanese as she went. "Mother, I received your letter. I read it 3 times. I am still angry with you. I think I will be angry for a long time. You chose the emperor over me. You told me I was weak for wanting to stay in America. You made me feel like I had to choose between my heritage and my home. That was wrong. It hurt me in ways I am still trying to heal. But I am also tired of being angry. I am tired of carrying this weight. You say you are in a camp now. So am I. You say you are learning what it means to be imprisoned for who you are. So am I. Maybe we are both prisoners of different kinds of walls. Maybe we are both learning the same lesson about what matters and what does not. You ask for forgiveness. I am not ready to give it yet, but I am willing to try. Write to me again. Tell me what it is like there. Tell me what you are learning. Tell me if you are safe. I cannot promise I will forgive you, but I can promise I will read your letters. Maybe that is enough to start. Your daughter, Grace." The barracks was completely silent when Haruko finished reading. Then Yuki started to clap, softly at first. Then others joined. Not all of them, but enough. Enough to fill the space with the sound of women acknowledging that something important had just happened. Fujimoto looked up, her face wet with tears, and for the first time since any of them had known her, she smiled. A small, broken, genuine smile. "Thank you," she said to Haruko, to Thomas, to the room. "Thank you." That evening, Haruko found a piece of paper on her bunk. Not one of the scraps she had been collecting. A real piece of stationery, clean and white, and obviously from the camp administrative office. A note was pinned to it. "For your letters, you should not have to write on garbage. J.O." Jimmy O'Connor had been watching, had understood, had cared enough to steal proper paper from supply. Haruko sat down and wrote another letter. Not to Takeshi this time. To Private O'Connor. To the boy with the dead brother and the rosary he could not stop carrying. She wrote about the soap box, about Captain Fujimoto's letter, about how small acts of kindness were dismantling walls that had been built from years of propaganda. She wrote about how terrifying it was to realize that the enemy might not be enemies at all. Just people. Just humans trying to survive the same war from different sides. She wrote about bacon and lavender soap and how strange it was that these small things could undo you more effectively than any weapon. She gave the letter to Thomas the next morning, asked him to deliver it, and she waited. 2 days later, Jimmy's response came. "Miss Tanaka, your letter made me cry in front of the other guys. They think I have gone soft. Maybe I have. But Sean's last letter to me said that mercy was what made us American. That kindness was what separated us from the thing we were fighting. I did not understand what he meant until I met you. Until I watched 70 women walk into this camp expecting death and instead finding bacon and soap and letters that got through to daughters who needed to hear from their mothers. I still miss my brother. I think I always will. But your letter reminded me that he did not die for nothing. He died so people like me could choose mercy over revenge. That has to mean something. Thank you for helping me see that. And Miss Tanaka, I hope your doctor is alive. I hope you get to wear that hairpin on your wedding day. I hope this war ends and you get to go home to something worth going home to. But even if you do not, even if everything you loved is gone, I hope you remember that you mattered here. You changed things here. You changed me. That counts for something. Respectfully, Private James O'Connor." Haruko read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and placed it in her pocket next to the kanzashi. 2 pieces of hope. One from before the war, one from during. Both equally fragile, both equally precious. Outside, spring was beginning to soften the Massachusetts winter. The snow was melting, the days were getting longer, and inside the barracks of Camp Miles Standish, 70 Japanese women were learning that survival was not the same as living, and that sometimes the hardest thing to survive was kindness. April arrived with the promise of repatriation. Colonel Hayes made the announcement during morning roll call, his voice carrying across the yard where 70 women stood in formation. Thomas translated his words careful and measured, But even he could not soften the reality of what was coming. The war in the Pacific continues, but arrangements have been made through the International Red Cross for prisoner exchanges. You will be repatriated to Japan beginning May 15th. You have 6 weeks to prepare. 6 weeks. The number hung in the air like a sentence. Not long enough to process what they had experienced. Too long to spend waiting for an uncertain future. That night, the barracks filled with whispered conversations. Some women cried with relief. They wanted to go home, even if home was rubble and ash. Even if everyone they loved was dead. At least it would be their rubble, their ash, their dead. Others were quieter. The older women who understood that Japan in 1945 would not be the Japan they had left. That the country they were returning to was a country in collapse, starving and bombed and occupied by the very forces that had treated them with unexpected kindness. Haruko sat on her bunk, the kanzashi in one hand and Jimmy's letter in the other. Two symbols of two different impossibilities. Marriage to a man who was probably dead. Friendship with an enemy who had somehow become human. She thought about Nagasaki, about whether her mother's house still stood, about whether the hospital where she had trained was still operating or had been reduced to debris, about whether there was anything worth returning to besides ghosts and memories. Yuki sat beside her, their shoulders touching. "Are you afraid?" Haruko considered the question. "Yes, but I am more afraid of staying." "Why?" "Because if I stay too long, I might forget who I am supposed to be. I might start believing that this is normal, that enemies can be kind, that war is not absolute, that there are shades of gray between victory and defeat." Yuki was quiet for a moment. "Would that be so terrible, to believe those things I do not know?" Haruko's voice was barely a whisper. "That is what terrifies me." Over the next 2 weeks, Haruko began a new project. A final accounting of everything she had learned, felt, and survived in this strange liminal space between war and peace. She wrote letters, not just to Takeshi anymore, to everyone, to people living and dead, to people she would never send the words to but needed to write them anyway. She wrote to her mother who had died in the Nagasaki bombing 6 months earlier, though Haruko would not learn this until she returned home. "Okason, they gave us soap that smells like your camellia garden, the one you tended every morning before the war. I cried when I washed my hair because I remembered you teaching me how to care for it. How you said cleanliness was dignity. How you said a woman who takes care of herself takes care of the world around her. You were right. When they gave us that soap, they gave us back our dignity, not because we were clean, but because someone thought we deserved to be. I thought dignity was something you lost when you were defeated, when you were captured, when you were imprisoned. But I have learned something here. Dignity is not about being undefeated. It is about how you stand when you are on your knees. It is about choosing to wash your face even when no one is watching. It is about combing your hair even when you have nowhere to go. The Americans did not give us our dignity back. They just reminded us that we had never lost it. We had only forgotten where to find it. I miss you. I miss the garden. I miss the version of myself who knew how to be your daughter without also being a soldier. I do not know if I can find her again. But I am trying." She wrote to Captain Fujimoto even though the captain was 20 feet away and could have heard the words if Haruko had spoken them aloud. "Captain, I know you think I have gone soft, that I have let the enemy seduce me with bacon and soap and small kindnesses. Maybe you are right. Maybe I have lost the edge that kept me alive in Saipan. But I have gained something too. I have gained the ability to see our captors as human. To recognize that the boy guarding us lost his brother the same way I lost my fiancé. To understand that the interpreter helping us is carrying the same grief we carry. To know that the colonel who feeds us and clothes us and treats us with respect is following the same code of honor we were supposed to follow. Geneva Convention, they call it. Rules of war. The idea that even in the midst of killing, there are lines we do not cross. I did not believe in those lines before. I thought war was absolute. Kill or be killed, survive or perish. But they have shown me something different. They have shown me that how we fight matters as much as whether we win. That mercy is not weakness. That kindness is not surrender. I am not asking you to forgive them. I am not even asking you to like them. I am only asking you to see them. Really see them. The way Grace sees you now. The way your daughter looked past your mistakes to find the mother underneath. That is the gift they have given us. Not freedom, not comfort, but the ability to see past the uniform to the person inside. I hope you can accept that gift. I hope I can too. She wrote to Takeshi knowing now with a certainty that felt like grief that he was dead, that he had died months ago, probably at Okinawa, probably in the chaos of the American invasion. But she wrote to him anyway because the dead needed to be spoken to, and because speaking to him was the only way she knew how to let him go. Takeshi, I need to tell you something I have been afraid to admit. I do not think you are coming back. I have not heard from you in 9 months. The last letter said you were being sent to Okinawa. I know what happened at Okinawa. I know the casualty rates. I know the Americans took the island. I know that field hospitals were primary targets because destroying medical care destroyed morale. I know you are dead. I have known for months. But I could not say it out loud because saying it would make it real. And as long as I did not say it, I could pretend that somewhere, somehow you were still alive, still waiting for me, still planning our wedding, still believing that after the war we could have the life we dreamed about. But I cannot pretend anymore. I have to let you go. Not because I want to, because I have to survive. And I cannot survive while carrying your ghost. The Americans have taught me something about survival. They have taught me that it is not enough to simply not die. That true survival means living, choosing life even when death would be easier, choosing hope even when hope is foolish, choosing to comb my hair and wash my face and eat bacon and write letters because those small acts of self-care are acts of defiance against a war that wanted to erase me. You would have liked it here. The guards are young and earnest and trying so hard to do the right thing even when they do not know what the right thing is. The interpreter is kind and patient and carries his own grief with a dignity that would have impressed you. The colonel treats us like guests instead of prisoners. They are not perfect, but they are trying, and their trying has saved me in ways I cannot fully explain. I am going home soon, back to Nagasaki, back to whatever is left. I will look for you even though I know I will not find you. I will visit the places we used to go. I will remember the version of myself who loved you. But I will not stay there. I will not build a shrine to our lost future and live inside it until I die. I will keep living, for both of us, because you cannot. I hope that is enough. I hope you would understand. I hope wherever you are at peace. I am trying to find peace too. Goodbye, Takeshi. I loved you. I still love you. I always will. But I have to let you go now. She folded the letter and held it against her chest for a long moment. Then she tucked it into her pocket with the kanzashi. 2 pieces of a past that no longer existed. 2 reminders of who she had been before the war taught her to be someone else. The next day, she began the ritual that would define her final weeks at Camp Miles Standish. She waited until after dark when most of the women were asleep or pretending to be. She slipped outside, nodding to the night guard, who had learned to expect her evening walks. She made her point into the area behind the mess hall, where a small fire pit had been dug for burning trash. She built a tiny fire, just enough to sustain a flame, just enough to consume what she needed to consume. From her pocket, she withdrew a single strand of hair. She had pulled it from her head that morning, chosen carefully from the crown where it would not be noticed. She held it over the flame. The hair curled and blackened and disappeared in seconds, leaving only the faint smell of burned keratin and a small wisp of smoke that dissolved into the night air. She did not pray, did not speak, did not perform any ritual beyond the act itself. She was burning away who she had been, one strand at a time, making room for whoever she would need to become. The next night she burned another strand, and the night after that, and the night after that. 14 nights, 14 strands of hair, 14 small acts of letting go. On the 14th night, she burned the final hairpin from her original saipan bun, the last physical remnant of the soldier she had been taught to become. She watched it blacken and curl in the flames, and she felt something inside her chest loosen. Not break, just loosen, like a knot finally coming undone. Yuki found her there, sitting by the dying fire, her face lit by the last of the embers. "What are you doing?" Haruko did not look up, letting go of what everything that does not serve me anymore. The propaganda, the fear, the belief that suffering makes me strong. The idea that I have to carry every loss like a stone until I collapse under the weight. Yuki sat down beside her. That is a lot to let go of. Yes, but I cannot carry it all back to Japan. There is not room for all of it, and me too. They sat in silence for a while, watching the fire die. Finally, Yuki spoke. I am afraid of going back. Me too. What if there is nothing left? Then we will build something new. What if we cannot? Then we will have tried. That has to count for something, does it? Haruko looked at her friend, this young woman, who had cried over bacon and laughed over soap and slowly, carefully rebuilt herself from the fragments that war had left behind. It has to, Haruko said quietly, because if it does not, then what was any of this for? On the 15th night, Haruko did not burn hair. Instead, she wrote the final letter, the one that mattered most, the one she would keep. She sat at the small table in the corner of the barracks. The good stationery that Jimmy had given her spread before her, a borrowed pen in her hand. At the top of the page, she wrote, "To whoever I become." Then she began, I do not know who you are. Maybe you are me in 10 years reading this in a small house in Nagasaki, laughing at how dramatic I was at 28. Maybe you are my daughter finding this letter in a box after I am gone, trying to understand the mother you thought you knew. Maybe you are a stranger who stumbled upon these words in some archive or museum, wondering what happened to the Japanese women who were held at Camp Miles Standish in the spring of 1945. Whoever you are, listen. I came to this camp expecting death. I had been taught that Americans were demons, that they would rape us and torture us and kill us slowly for their entertainment. That capture was worse than suicide. That surrender was unforgivable. I was wrong. They gave us bacon for breakfast. They gave us soap that smelled like lavender. They gave us combs and mirrors and the small dignities that make life bearable. They treated us like human beings instead of like vermin. And it broke me in ways that torture never could. Because it is easy to hate someone who hurts you. It is almost impossible to hate someone who shows you kindness. I have learned things here that I will carry for the rest of my life. I have learned that enemies are just people who have not shared a meal yet. That once you sit across from someone and watch them eat bacon, once you see them laugh or cry or struggle with the same fears you struggle with, it becomes very difficult to see them as less than human. I have learned that kindness is a language that needs no translation. That a bar of soap given freely says more than 1,000 words. That small acts of mercy can dismantle walls that years of propaganda built. I have learned that the hardest person to show mercy to is yourself. That forgiving yourself for surviving when others died is harder than forgiving the enemy for their victories. That choosing to live, really live, instead of just existing in a state of waiting for death, is an act of courage that no one prepares you for. I have learned that bacon is really, really good. That may seem trivial, but it is not. Because in a world that has taken everything from you, a piece of crispy bacon can remind you that pleasure still exists. That taste and smell and small joys are still possible. That you are still capable of feeling something other than fear and grief and exhausted numbness. I am going back to Japan soon, back to a country I will not recognize, to look for a man who is almost certainly dead, to try to rebuild a life from ruins and memories and whatever scraps the war has left behind. I do not know if I will succeed. I do not know if I will even survive the first year. But I know this, I am not the same woman who was captured in Manila. I am not the same woman who stood in the snow and let her hair down for an enemy guard. I am not the same woman who cried over soap. I have been changed by this place, by these people, by the unexpected discovery that mercy exists even in the midst of war. If you are reading this years from now, remember this, you survived, not by being unbreakable, but by being willing to break and still choose to heal. Not by being fearless, but by being afraid and choosing courage anyway. Not by being perfect, but by being human in a world that tried to strip your humanity away. Choose healing. Choose mercy. Choose kindness, especially when it is hard. Choose to comb your hair even when you have nowhere to go. Choose to wash your face even when no one is watching. Choose to eat bacon and let yourself enjoy it without guilt. Choose to write letters to the dead because speaking to them is how you learn to let them go. Choose to forgive yourself for surviving. Choose to live, really live. Not just survive, but live. Because survival is not enough. It has never been enough. We were made for more than just not dying. We were made for joy and connection and small moments of beauty in the midst of horror. Do not let the war take that from you. Do not let anything take that from you. I hope I remember this. I hope whoever you are, wherever you are, you remember this too. With hope, Haruko Tanaka. April 28, 1945. Camp Miles Standish, Massachusetts, United States of America. She read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and placed it in her pocket next to the kanzashi and the letters from Jimmy and Takeshi. A collection of paper and hope. A collection of who she had been and who she was trying to become. 2 weeks before departure, the guards organized a small event that no one had asked for and everyone needed. A baseball game. The guards versus the maintenance crew. An annual tradition at Camp Miles Standish, usually watched by off-duty soldiers and whoever happened to be passing by. This year, Colonel Hayes invited the Japanese women to attend. Most came out of curiosity. A few came out of boredom. All of them stayed because they had never seen grown men take a children's game so seriously. Haruko sat on a rough wooden bench beside Yuki and Captain Fujimoto, watching as American soldiers ran around a diamond-shaped field, hitting a ball with a stick and shouting encouragement at each other with an enthusiasm that seemed completely disconnected from the stakes of the game. "It is just a game," Fujimoto said, bewildered. "Why are they celebrating as if they won a battle?" "Because for them right now, this is the battle that matters." Haruko watched as Jimmy ran to catch a ball. His face split in a grin so wide it looked painful. They are not thinking about the war. They are just thinking about this moment, this game, this small piece of joy in the midst of everything else. That seems foolish. Maybe. Or maybe it is the smartest thing they do. Maybe forgetting the war for an hour is what keeps them sane. They watched in silence as the game continued. At one point, one of the guards missed an easy catch, and his teammates erupted in good-natured teasing. The guard laughed, made an exaggerated bow, and tried again. Haruko found herself smiling. When had she last seen people laugh like that? When had she last heard joy that was not laced with bitterness or desperation? After the game, Jimmy approached the bench where the women sat. He was sweating and grinning, his uniform dirty from sliding into bases. Through Thomas, he asked, "Did you understand the game?" "Not at all," Haruko replied honestly. "But I enjoyed watching you enjoy it," Jimmy laughed. "That is basically the American approach to everything. We may not know what we are doing, but we are going to have fun doing it." It was the most human Haruko had ever seen him. Not a guard, not a soldier, just a young man playing a game and forgetting for an hour that the world was at war. That night, she wrote him one final letter. Private O'Connor, I watched you play baseball today. I did not understand the rules. I did not understand why you ran in circles or why hitting a ball made everyone so happy. But I understood joy. I saw it on your face, pure and uncomplicated and completely disconnected from the war. It reminded me that joy is still possible, that even in the midst of death and destruction and grief that feels like it will never end, humans can still laugh, can still play, can still find moments of lightness. Thank you for that reminder. Thank you for showing me that the war has not taken everything, that there are still pockets of life that exist outside of survival. You asked me once if I thought you had gone soft. I do not think softness is weakness. I think softness is what has kept you human. Your brother would be proud of you, not because you guarded enemies well, but because you stayed soft when the world tried to make you hard, because you chose mercy when revenge would have been easier, because you played baseball with joy even though your heart was still broken. That is courage. That is strength. That is everything worth fighting for. I hope you know that. I hope you never forget it. When I leave here, I will take that image with me. You running across the field, laughing, fully alive. It will remind me that life is still worth living, that joy is still worth pursuing, that we do not have to let the war win. Thank you for everything. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for your kindness. Thank you for proving that enemies do not have to stay enemies. I hope you find peace. I hope the war ends soon. I hope you get to go home and play baseball in streets that are not shadowed by grief. You deserve that. We all deserve that. We all. With gratitude, Haruko Tanaka. May 8th arrived with unexpected significance. Victory in Europe Day. The war in Europe had ended. Germany had surrendered. The camp erupted in celebration. Guards shouting, music playing, an impromptu party that spilled across the yard and into the evening. The Japanese women watched from the barracks windows, uncertain how to process this news. The war was not over for them. Japan still fought. The Pacific theater still raged. But half the war had ended. Half the killing had stopped. Is that what victory looks like? Yuki asked quietly. Haruko did not answer. She was thinking about all the German prisoners who were also held in camps across America. Were they celebrating? Were they mourning? Were they like the Japanese women caught in the strange space between relief and uncertainty? That evening, the women were scheduled to board trucks for Boston Harbor. The repatriation ship would leave in the morning. The barracks filled with the sounds of packing, women folding the few belongings they had accumulated, saying quiet goodbyes to the bunks they had slept in, the windows they had looked through, the small spaces that had somehow become familiar. Haruko packed slowly. The letters went into her coat pocket along with the kanzashi. The comb from the soap box went into a small bag that the Red Cross had provided. Everything else she owned could fit in one hand. Colonel Hayes addressed them one final time before they boarded the trucks. Thomas translated, his voice carrying the weight of everything left unsaid. Ladies, it has been our honor to care for you these past 3 months. We hope we have treated you with the respect and dignity that the Geneva Convention requires and that basic human decency demands. We wish you safe travels and hope you find peace when you return home. You have shown remarkable courage and grace under difficult circumstances. We will not forget you. Some of the women cried. Some stood stoic. All of them bowed, a gesture of respect that transcended culture and language. The guards formed an honor guard as the women walked to the trucks. Not a military formation. Just a line of young men standing at attention, showing respect to people who had been enemies and had somehow become something more complicated. Jimmy stood near the end of the line. When Haruko passed, he saluted, a formal gesture that carried an informal weight. Haruko stopped, bowed deeply, then did something she had never done before. She spoke in English, halting and accented but clear enough. Thank you for everything. Jimmy's eyes filled with tears. He nodded, not trusting his voice. Safe journey, ma'am. Tell your people some of us tried. I will tell them. Haruko's voice was steady. I will tell them that mercy exists, that kindness is possible, that enemies can become friends if given the chance. I will tell them about you. She walked on, leaving Jimmy standing in the evening light, one hand raised in a half wave that she did not see because she could not look back without falling apart. The truck ride to Boston Harbor took 2 hours. The women sat in silence watching the Massachusetts countryside roll past. Spring had fully arrived, trees budding, flowers blooming, the world renewing itself while they returned to a country that was dying. At one point, the convoy passed an American military cemetery. Rows upon rows of white crosses stretching into the distance. Thousands of them. Tens of thousands. Haruko pressed her hand against the truck window, her palm flat against the cold glass. Somewhere in there, or in a cemetery like it, rested the bodies of young men who had died fighting Japan. Maybe Jimmy's brother Sean. Maybe the brothers and sons and fathers of the other guards. Maybe men who would have hated her. Maybe men who would have shown her kindness. She would never know. All she knew was that they were dead and she was alive, and somehow she had to find a way to honor both realities. At Boston Harbor, a ship waited, not a military vessel, a civilian ship repurposed for repatriation. Neutral flags, Red Cross markings, a promise of safe passage. Before boarding, Thomas distributed small packages to each woman. Care packages from the camp, food for the journey, basic supplies, small American flags for those who wanted them. Most women refused the flags. A few, including Haruko, took them and tucked them deep into their bags where no one would see. Thomas approached Haruko last. He handed her an envelope separate from the care package. From all of us, he said quietly, open it on the ship. Haruko took the envelope, feeling the weight of something more than paper inside. What is it? A reminder that this happened, that it mattered, that you mattered. She wanted to say something profound, something worthy of the moment, but all that came out was, thank you for being a bridge. Thomas smiled, and for the first time in months, the sadness in his eyes lightened slightly. That is all any of us can do. Build bridges, one translation at a time. The ship's horn sounded, time to board. Haruko joined the line of women walking up the gangplank. At the top, she turned for one last look at the harbor, the city, the country that had imprisoned her and somehow set her free. The guards were still there standing on the dock, a small cluster of young men in uniform waving goodbye to women they had been taught to hate and had learned to see as human. Haruko raised her hand, a small wave, a gesture of farewell and gratitude and grief for all the versions of herself she was leaving behind. Then she turned and walked onto the ship into whatever came next. On deck, as the ship pulled away from the harbor, Haruko opened Thomas's envelope. Inside was a photograph, the one taken 3 weeks ago. 70 Japanese women standing with their American guards, faces visible, hair down, smiling. And beneath the photo, a note signed by every guard, every administrator, every person who had worked at Camp Miles Standish during their imprisonment. You taught us that the enemy has a face and a heart. Fair winds. We will remember you. Haruko held the photograph and watched the Boston skyline fade into the distance. The wind pulled at her hair, loosening strands from the bun she had carefully pinned that morning. She did not fix it. She let the wind take what it wanted. From her pocket, she withdrew the burned hairpin, the one she had used in Saipan, the one that represented everything she had been before kindness had undone her. She held it over the water for a long moment. Then she opened her hand and let it fall. It hit the surface with a splash too small to hear over the ship's engines. Then it sank, carrying with it the soldier she had been forced to become, leaving only the woman she was choosing to be. In her other pocket, the letters remained. Takeshi's memory, Jimmy's kindness, her own words to whoever she would become. She was going home. But home was no longer a place. It was a choice, a daily decision to live instead of merely survive, to choose mercy over bitterness, to comb her hair even when she had nowhere to go, to remember bacon and lavender soap and the unexpected discovery that enemies could become friends if someone was brave enough to let their hair down first. The ship moved through dark water toward an uncertain future, and Haruko Tanaka, 28 years old, former soldier, former prisoner, current survivor, stood at the railing and chose to hope. Because hope, she had learned, was the most radical act of all, and she had always been braver than she knew. The voyage took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of rolling seas and crowded berths, and women slowly processing what they had experienced. Some talked, some withdrew. All of them changed. Haruko spent her days on deck, when weather permitted, writing letters she would never send and watching the ocean scroll past in endless gray waves. She spent her nights reading and rereading the letters she had received. Jimmy's words about mercy, Thomas's words about bridges, the photograph of 70 women who had learned to be human again. When the ship finally reached Japan, the passengers disembarked into chaos. The country was in ruins, cities bombed, infrastructure destroyed, millions displaced, food scarce, hope scarcer. Haruko made her way to Nagasaki and found exactly what she had feared. Her mother's house was gone. The hospital where she had trained was rubble. The garden where Takeshi had proposed existed only in memory. But she also found Red Cross workers, orphans who needed care, a small clinic that needed nurses, work that needed doing. She found purpose. She wore the kanzashi only once, on the anniversary of the day Takeshi had given it to her. She pinned it in her hair, visited what remained of the hospital, and said goodbye one final time. Then she put it away in a box with the letters and the photograph and the small American flag she had hidden in her bag. She met Hiroshi Tanaka in 1950, a school teacher, kind and quiet, and asking no questions about the war. They married in a simple ceremony. No kanzashi, just a plain kimono, and a man who loved her without needing to know everything she had survived. In 1952, she gave birth to a daughter, Emiko, blessed, beautiful child. And she whispered to the infant in her arms, "You are proof that mercy wins. You are proof that life continues. You are proof that I chose hope." Years passed, Hiroshi died, Emiko grew, Japan rebuilt. And in 1983, when Haruko was diagnosed with the heart disease that would kill her, she finally told her daughter everything. Every detail of Camp Miles Standish, the bacon, the soap, the letters, Jimmy and Thomas and Captain Fujimoto, the baseball game and the hair-burning ritual, and the moment she let herself hope again. Emiko recorded every word. And when Haruko died in 1984, holding her daughter's hand, her final words were simple: find them. The people who saved me, tell them thank you. Emiko kept that promise. She found Thomas in Los Angeles, found Grace Fujimoto Williams in San Diego, found Jimmy O'Connor in Austin, Texas. She collected their stories, their letters, their memories. And in 1987, she opened a small exhibition at the California Historical Society, Letters We Never Sent, Mercy in War. The centerpiece was a glass case containing a burned hairpin, a pearl kanzashi, a bar of lavender soap, and a handwritten letter that began, "To whoever I become." Thousands of people visited, veterans and families and students and strangers who needed to know that mercy was possible, that kindness could survive, that enemies did not have to stay enemies. In 1999, Emiko published the book her mother had never written, The Hairpin That Changed Everything. It became a quiet bestseller, not because it was sensational, but because it was true, because it proved something essential, that in the midst of the worst humanity could do, individuals could still choose the best, that bacon and soap and small acts of kindness could dismantle walls that propaganda built, that letting your hair down could be an act of courage, that writing letters you never sent could save you, that mercy in the end was the only victory that mattered. And somewhere in a small house in Austin, an elderly man named Jimmy O'Connor read the book and cried, because he had spent 45 years wondering if that moment had mattered, if his small kindness had made any difference at all. And now he knew. It had. It still did. It always would. Because mercy, once given, ripples forward through time, touching lives and changing hearts, improving again and again that we are more than the wars we fight. We are the kindness we choose, the letters we write, the hope we carry, and the courage to let our hair down even when the world tells us to stay invisible. That is the story of Haruko Tanaka. That is the story of Camp Miles Standish. That is the story of 70 women who expected death and found bacon. And it is the story of all of us if we are brave enough to choose mercy over hate, to see the enemy as human, to write letters we may never send, to let go of who we were so we can become who we need to be, to choose life, always life, even when death would be easier. That is the legacy, that is the lesson, that is what remains when everything else is ashes. Hope, kindness, mercy, and the memory of bacon shared between enemies who became friends. May we all be so brave. May we all choose so wisely. May we all remember that the smallest acts of kindness can change everything. Because they can. They did. They will. Always.